Whether they're to be the best of times or the worst of times, one thing's for sure, nobody chooses the age into which to be born. All we can do is decide who we want to be and try our hardest to make the best of things. When Tang Xianzu was 42, he had a dream. When it came to him, his life was at a low point. Demoted, banished, and seriously ill, Tang's life seemed to be over. But something revolutionary was happening while he slept. The real Tang Xianzu was waking up. Soon he would encounter Du Li Niang and start his journey to literary immortality.
For now, we're going to go from the buzzer. We'll go from here.
The British theatre company Gecko is well known for its expressive use of body language. The cooperation between Gecko and the Shanghai Dramatic Arts Center is a great challenge for the Chinese actors. With the debut performance just around the corner, rehearsal is now more important than ever.
Not bad, but everyone was too quick. That's the good news.
The actors are having some problems with the tempo of the scene. They're having a meeting during the break. Tang Xianzu journeyed south in October, arriving at Leizhou Peninsula towards the end of 1591. As he approached, his thoughts turned to Zhang Jizheng's son, Zhang Sushou, who was also in exile at the time. How he remembered those far-off days when Zhang Jizheng had tried to befriend him so he would help his son in the imperial exam. Maybe if he'd done as Zhang Jizheng had asked, he would have passed the exam himself much sooner. Not that it would have made much difference to his career. When Zhang Jizheng passed away, his family were all persecuted and exiled. Before arriving at Shiwen, Tang Xianzu inquired about Zhang Sushou's whereabouts and paid him a visit. This detail demonstrates something important about Tang Xianzu. While he would never stoop to bowing and scraping, neither was he cruel. Compassionate and tolerant to the last thing he would do was kick a man when he was down. So it was that in 1592, Tang Xianzu found himself living in Shiwen, a small county by Cheongzhou Strait in Guangdong Province. By that point, far away in London, Shakespeare had already made a name for himself, though not perhaps the one he would have liked. For it was in this year that Shakespeare's name first appeared in print, in a pamphlet written by the then-famous writer, Robert Greene. This first reference to Shakespeare is not flattering. Greene describes him as an absolute Johannes Factotum man, an upstart crow beautified with our feathers, who supposed his own conceit the only Shake scene in the country. Prior to this 1592 reference, no records of Shakespeare as a dramatist exist. What happened in the years between Shakespeare's departure from Stratford and his arrival in London cannot be known for certain. But Shakespeare must have been a successful writer by this point. Why else would Robert Greene have mentioned him in such scathing and jealous terms? Those early years in the capital must have been difficult. Alone, without friends or influence, a mere nobody in his early 20s. London, with its grandeur and filth, must have been an intimidating place for a youngster from a provincial backwater like Stratford. So, Shakespeare's first priority must have been to find a way of making a living. Precisely when and how he got into the business of plays isn't known. All anyone can say is that he probably started at the bottom, as a jobbing actor taking on walk-on parts. What's equally clear is that he wasted no opportunity to learn all he could about the art and craft of plays. He must have learned fast. Soon he was creating plays of his own. The young actor was metamorphosing into a playwright. The reign of Elizabeth I was an interesting and challenging period to be a writer. Following hot on the heels of the Renaissance and Reformation, it was a time when new ideas were spreading, when old notions were being overthrown. But though Queen Elizabeth was relatively open-minded and tolerant, writers still had to tread with care. So while the young Shakespeare could give fuller expression to his creativity than writers of earlier generation, certain topics, like the history of previous monarchs and dynasties, a favorite theme for Shakespeare, could be tricky. But perhaps those constraints were also a source of inspiration. Sometime in 1591, he started to write the history play Henry VI for Lord Strang's Men, the most famous playing company in London at the time. Shakespeare, the creator of immortal drama, was about to make his debut.
How many makes the hour full complete? How many hours bring about the day? How many days will finish up the year? How many years a mortal man may live? When this is known, then to divide the times. So many hours must I tend my flock. So many hours must I take my rest. So many hours must I sport myself. So many hours must I contemplate. So minutes, hours, days, months and years, passed over to the end it were created, would bring white hairs unto a quiet grave. What a life were this! How sweet, how lovely.
Henry VI was most likely performed in 1591. By all accounts, it was a sensation. His debut play showed just how well the young actor-turned-writer had learnt his new craft. It also contained the glimmers of the quality that would earn him his place in world literature's Hall of Fame. His ability to connect with a whole range of human emotions in a single play, laughter one scene, floods of tears the next.
I would say that Shakespeare's lucky at living when he did, because there's a kind of balance at this time. It's a time which is both looking backwards and looking forwards. At this time, England is still a relatively traditional society. And only 20 or 30 years after Shakespeare's death, there's going to be a revolution, a political revolution in this country. So it's a society which is very much in a process of change from a world that's very traditional and long established to one in which all these expectations are starting to be overturned or at least to be challenged. And I think that's something that makes Shakespeare uniquely positioned to capture that rich mix of different kinds of cultural sensitivity.
It was just as Robert Greene put it. Shakespeare really was making a shake scene, shaking things up on the Elizabethan stage. And this was only the beginning. There was plenty more to come from Shakespeare's quill. Over in China, while Shakespeare basked in the applause, life was very different for Tang Xianzu. At that time, hardship, not adoration, looked set to be his lot in life. One day in July, Tang Xianzu wrote a letter to Xiang Ying Xiang, an official at the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs. At this time, Tang Xianzu was serving as a magistrate of Suichang County, where Xiang Ying Xiang came from. One problem facing Tang was tax evasion on the part of many landlords and wealthy families. Tang Xianzu attached a list of tax evaders to his letter, many of whom were Xiang's relatives. It would turn out to be a big mistake. Tang Xianzu had become magistrate of Suichang County in 1593. Suichang was a small county in Zhejiang province. Surrounded by mountains, it was a remote place, as it remains to this very day. 400 years ago, when Tang Xianzu came, it had a population of less than 20,000 people, most living in poverty and isolation. It was thanks to the help of his friends that Tang Xianzu was able to transfer to a new official posting in Suichang. But it wasn't an ideal posting. His friends wanted to help him get a better position, or at least return to his previous post. Tang Xianzu, however, took a more optimistic view of the situation. At last, he had the chance to put his ideas about better governance into practice.
汤显祖呢，他4月份的时候呢，他刚到1个月嘛，就要到县城到处走走，他就看到呢一个名流山下，这个地方非常好，有水，然后呢边上是寿光宫，边上有其他的一些建筑，他就问他们这些诸生说，哎，是不是我们在这里建一个书院呢？这个书院建成以后呢，汤显祖把它想了个名字，叫相浦书院。其实这个是有含义的。他说遂昌是山城人嘛，要有将相之才。汤显祖3月份来，然后4月份巡视，5月份就开始建，6月份就把这个书院建好了。说明他到遂昌，首先他是觉得教育是为重的。我们遂昌呢，从那以后呢，文风就起了，所以历来呢，文人学士都非常尊重他。
Tang's letter had left Xiang Ying Xiang red-faced with embarrassment. Though Xiang was not an especially high-ranking official, it was important enough not to be trifled with. Worse, for Tang, the ministry he worked for was an exceptionally powerful one, the Ministry of Personnel Affairs, a ministry with the power to make or break an official career in any department. Heedless of the consequences, in his determination to be the superior man and never stoop, Tang had made a powerful enemy. But revenge is a dish best served cold. Xiang waited until the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs asked him to appraise Tang Xianzu's performance in Suichang to strike back. The sly Xiang replied briefly, with a devastating sarcasm, "A son never says his mother's ugly." In just a few words, Xiang had dealt Tang's official career its death blow.
在汤显祖认为，世界是由礼法、权势与情所构成的。那么呢，他认为世界有情之天下，有法之天下。他所处在的明朝，在他认为只有礼法、权势，没有情。他当了一县之长的县官以后呢，这个时候他能够独立的把他自己的政治思想，这个时候运用出来，是把水场当是他的政治理想的实验地。
In the second year of Tang Xianzu's tenure, he came up with an idea. It was the Lantern Festival, a very special time of year. But why not let convicts enjoy it too? With that in mind, he ordered prisoners to be released from their shackles. Then washed and supplied with clean clothes, they were permitted to leave prison to watch the lantern show by the river. Afterwards, touched by Tong's humanity, all the convicts voluntarily returned to prison. Tong's notion of using feelings and emotions to govern looked vindicated. Afterwards, Tang Xianzu built on this idea, setting convicts free during the Chinese New Year so they could be with their families. Once again, the kindness of the magistrate was repaid back in coin of trust and gratitude. After New Year, all the prisoners came back voluntarily. Under Tang Xianzu's benevolent rule, so it was said, Sui Chong sprang to life, farmers farming with renewed vigor, students applying themselves to their studies with added diligence. With Sui Chong stable and at peace, thanks to his policies as magistrate, Tong had few cases to hear. Instead, he spent most of his time listening to the local music and drums, enjoying the quiet days, and making friends with people from all walks of life. In his poems, Tang Xianzu referred to Sui Chong as the paradise, calling himself the magistrate of paradise. In one act of the Peony Pavilion, he seems to be recalling his time in Sui Chong, a place where the hills are clear, the rills are clear. When you walk in the wilds, spring clouds appear. The officials are clear, their followers are clear. When lawsuits decrease, the pastorals appear. For Tong, it seems his tenure as an official in Sui Chong was an idyllic time. With so much free time on his hands, Tang Xianzu was able to address himself to his writings, in particular, the story of Du Li Niang. But happy and content though he was, Tong hadn't quite given up on political ambition. He still yearned for official recognition and promotion. In the Ming Dynasty, the term of a county magistrate lasted for 3 years. When his 3 years were up, rather than being promoted to a higher position, Tang Xianzu's tenure was renewed. When officials wrote to the imperial court, entreating the authorities to promote Tong or restore him to his previous position, the response was stony silence. As it became clear that Xiong's poisonous words had taken effect and killed his career, Tong's poetry lost its cheerful note, turning increasingly bitter. Nowadays, the old gold mine is one of Sui Chong's main tourist draws, chance for the public to take a look at historical relics dating all the way back to the Tang Dynasty. In winter 1596, eunuch Tao Jin arrived in Sui Chong with a secret order from Emperor Wan Li. Tong was to be tasked with setting up a team to increase exploitation of the area's gold resources. Clearly, the emperor was in desperate straits, both short of revenue and so at odds with his officials that he had to rely on his court eunuchs. But the Sui Chong gold seam had been exhausted as far back as the Tang Dynasty. What's more, with the mine flooded, digging deeper in search of gold would be dangerous, maybe even impossible. Deaf to reason, the eunuchs insisted, pushing Tong to step up efforts. In a letter to his friend, Tang Xianzu complained that the eunuch's demands went so much against nature that even a mountain could not withstand them. If even a mountain couldn't stand it, what chance had a man, even one of Tong's moral stature? So Sui Chong wasn't a paradise after all. Powerless to protect his people from the pitiless exploitation of the eunuchs and imperial envoys, Tang realized that his life had reached a crossroads. How much longer could he carry on as an official? Impotent as he was, maybe it was best for him to give up his official career and devote himself to writing. That way, at least, he could do some good. But the sad truth is that the brutal reality of life spares no one, not even great artists and writers. Over in London, the year of 1596 was turning out to be a tough one for Shakespeare. That August, his 11-year-old son Hamnet died. As Shakespeare's only son, Hamnet's death was a hard blow. In his play King John, which was written during that period, King John's dying words are, "There was so hot a summer in my bosom that all my bowels crumble up to dust. I'm his scribbled form, drawn with a pen upon a parchment, and against this fire do I shrink up." Could it be that Shakespeare was using the king as a mouthpiece to express his own feelings at the time? A few years later, Shakespeare finished his most famous tragedy, the one in which the protagonist, a Danish prince with a skull in one hand and a sword in the other, speaks the immortal line, "To be or not to be? That is the question."
To be or not to be? That is the question.
His name is, of course, Hamlet, a mere one letter different from Hamnet.
To suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune.
Could it be that by writing this play, Shakespeare was trying to give his son, who had never experienced love and hatred in his short life, a second life?
And then
Like Shakespeare, Tang Xianzu had also experienced the unique pain that a father who has lost his children feels. And like Shakespeare, he would also sublimate that sense of loss and pain into great art. In early spring of 1598, 48-year-old Tang Xianzu found himself wandering about in Shibiaobei, Hutong, not far from the examination hall in Beijing. The thoughts that were running through his head were ones that he had harbored for a long time. Now, at last, it was time for a decision. Tang was in the capital for a second time, reporting on progress in Suicheng. Before the journey, his friends had been confident that he would return with a higher rank. So it was that Tang Xianzu had arrived in the capital with high expectations. But his hopes were soon dashed. After a few calls on high-level officials in the capital, the situation became all too clear. Thanks to Xiong, his card was marked. He would never be promoted. No one really cared what he'd achieved. In 5 years, the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs' opinion hadn't changed. His rank would remain fixed too. Though spring had arrived, it was still chilly in Beijing that March. On his first visit to Beijing, 28 years earlier, Tang Xianzu had stayed at an inn on Shibiaobei Hutong, the one he used ever since when he came to the capital on official business. Whereas the familiarity of the place used to be a comfort to him, now it gave rise to different feelings. Once he'd been an energetic and ambitious young man, convinced that he had great contributions to make to his country. What had happened? Where had all the years gone? Here he was, no further on, still waiting for recognition, in precisely the same spot where his official career had begun. This was the moment when Tang Xianzu made a decision.
所以我们可以想象，他要离开那个仕途，他有多艰难啊！不到山穷水尽，不到完全没有希望，他是不可能走开的。那年他是本命年，49岁，啊，50岁古人称之为知非，就是说知道前面的49年都走错了，是吧？这时候他得想一想，他同时读书的小朋友们、同僚们，有的已经回家了，有的升官升上去了，只有他还在这中间沉啊浮啊，往前没有希望，于是他回家了。
Tang Xianzu was tired of waiting to be recognized. It was time to go. On the way back to Suichang from Beijing, he passed by the Viburnum Temple in Yongzhou. However, it was a single camellia flower in full bloom that caught his eye. Later he wrote in a poem, "Among all the viburnums stands the only camellia. I return to my hometown, but still miss it." When he went back to his hometown, Lichuan, he built a new house called the Hall of Camellia. That lonely but beautiful camellia flower became a symbol of Tang Xianzu's inner quest. A year after his resignation, disaster struck the gold mine in Suichang. According to the Suichang County Annals, whole mountainsides caved in, killing hundreds of people. Tang Xianzu's nightmare had become true. Nowadays, if you stand on the site, you can still get a sense of that dark moment of impending doom. Even today, the scattering stones seem like petrified tears shed for the disaster, frozen in time forever. On his return to Lichuan, Tang Xianzu threw himself into writing. At last he was able to bring into being the characters that had been haunting him for so long, to express his feelings through them. What's more, there was no need to pander to anyone else. He could, and he would, please himself. He would create his own ideal world.
但是有一个故事说，汤显祖回到家里写《牡丹亭》，有一天突然找不到他了，啊，找来找去，突然发现他原来在厨房里，在柴房间里在那儿哭呢，啊，为什么哭呢？他写到义女这出戏了。写到“赏春香，还是你旧罗裙”这句唱词了。地老天昏，莫去把老娘安顿。义女是在这样悲怆的、绝望的心态中间展开的。
A few months later, the play was finished. Later, it was widely known as the Peony Pavilion. In the preface, Tang Xianzu wrote, "Love is of a source unknown, yet it grows ever deeper. The living may die of it. By its power, the dead live again. Love is not love at its fullest if one who lives is unwilling to die for it, or if it cannot restore to life the one who has so died."
爱情，男女之情，不知是从哪儿来的。杜丽娘生活在高墙封闭的园林里面，除了老爸和老师之外，也就没有见过其他的男人。但是，16岁那年，鸟情丝吹来闲庭院，她做了一个奇怪的梦，于是她就懂得爱了。原来爱这个东西，情这个玩意儿，不是后天才有的，也不需要老师或者父亲教他，那是人的生命的最美的一种属性，是先天就有的，而一旦被春风唤醒，它就不可排遣了。至情，
至高、至大、至深、至远、至美、至真的情，它是超越生死的。
Although Tang Xianzu's personal feelings and emotions drove the writing of the Peony Pavilion, it can also be seen in the context of contemporary social commentary. A nationwide hit almost as soon as it was published, such was the demand for copies that it said that Lichuan streets were lit up all night thanks to the lamps of printers beavering away in their shops.
And so, Dulan Yang is that dream where you wake up and you go, oh, what am I doing? What am I doing? Hang on. And then Helena carries on her life and her normal day-to-day life, but she's thinking now. She's changed by these dreams. She's altered by it. In the same way she's altered by images that she sees of Midsummer Night's Dream, she's altered by the things that are happening in her life. And as the piece develops, we actually really blur the lines, so you don't know whether you're in a dream or in reality. And I really like that because the same things are true whether you're dreaming or in reality. Love is still true in both places. You know, like you can only really find love if you're dreaming, maybe.
The soul-stirring love story of Du Li Niang was especially popular with late Ming Dynasty women. It's said that Xiong Xiaoling, a famous female performer in Hangzhou, proved especially adept at playing the Peony Pavilion. Ironically, like Du Li Niang herself, Xiong was thwarted in love, never able to be with the man she loved. Maybe it was this experience that gave her performances in the Peony Pavilion an added poignancy. It's said that every time she played the role of Du Li Niang, especially the scenes of seeking the dream and premature death, her eyes would fill with tears. To many, it was as if the story of Du Li Niang was actually her own. One day, while playing Seeking the Dream, Xiong keeled over and died, apparently overcome by grief and woe.
莫非你是杨坠女士冯小青么？
非也。
你是
小女子，乃是半夜寻梦一者，伤悲不已。
你就是令女尚小丽，他们失敬了。
你看那姹紫嫣红的花园内，荡漾说的是什么？
春色。
那风吹地乱的草丛中，弥漫说的是什么？
春意。
你在看那如影缤纷的美食下，进退的又是什么？
春吹。
好过春色，春意，春吹。先生，一本《牡丹亭》写的是徐气徐俗，小女子演的是死去活来，看的是虚情虚醉，都这位藏在方寸之间的春情两字。
Although Tang Xianzu had a remarkable gift for writing, in all his years in office, he had never been appreciated by those in power. How could he write such a great play only half a year after his resignation?
就是这是种生命的积淀啊！他从可以说少年时候的才华，一直到官场的经历、官场的沉浮，他的建设，所有这一些，以及所有这些东西以后，经过一个可以说经过岁月沉淀过的生命的过滤。那么你看，他到了48、9岁的时候，他弃官挂印，回到了家乡，连着写了3部作品。应该说，前面的这一切都是给他安排的，冥冥之中给他的安排的一种积累，使他到了50岁过后，一个成熟生命的时候，他迸发出来。
不到园里，怎见群色日新。
It had taken decades, but Tang Xianzu had finally met Du Li Niang, that strange, ethereal figure who visited him in his dreams all those years ago. It was their destiny to meet. Tang Xianzu was bound one day to distill all his sadness and frustration into passionate words, words that would turn the dream of Du Li Niang into one of the greatest characters the Chinese stage has ever seen. Ever since Tang created her, Du Li Niang has been a potent symbol of human longing for love and freedom. During his 20 years in London, Shakespeare wrote at least 37 plays. He was lucky to have arrived in that city at a time when the English stage was about to embark on its golden age, a time of unprecedented flourishing that he was able to benefit from and contribute to. Today, London's West End is one of the great centers of world theater. With its deep, rich, enduring theatrical traditions, it's a lasting testament to the pioneering work of Shakespeare and his contemporaries more than 400 years ago.
Because like many great innovators, Shakespeare was inventing the form at the same time as he was writing. So he was not only writing plays, but he was deciding what a play would be and what theatre would be. He was innovating with the form. And so in that way, Shakespeare's theatre is the start of a modern period of theatre as a form of entertainment.
Tang Xianzu never wrote as many plays as Shakespeare. Living in a society that did not welcome new ideas and which restricted creativity, it's perhaps unsurprising that he only managed to produce 4 major works.
莎士比亚是一个职业剧作者，是一个打本子的人，他靠写戏吃饭。汤显祖是一个官员，但他还是我们中国人说的士大夫当中的一份子。因此，在他们两者之间，我想我们可以看到很多很多的不同。我就感觉他们是有一个非常相同的一点，那一点就是他们都是诗人，他们对于自由、对于想象的向往，简直令我们今天21世纪的人赞美。因为在他们看来，尤其在汤显祖看来，你只要有心灵啊，你心灵，你就能上下天地，来去古今。那如果说我们想到他所处的那个社会，他的那个时代，也许我们就能明白为什么他总是写梦。那么也可以明白他对于那种自由，他所描写的杜丽娘的那种对于春的憧憬追求，有多么多么不容易，可能超过莎士比亚。
But I imagine him sitting in his garden, a new place in Stratford, just as I imagine Tang Xianzu sitting in his garden too. And we've been to the museum and seen pictures of him sitting in his garden. So I think there's something about sitting in the garden in the latter part of these plays that makes them have a kind of mirror relationship. In a way, I can imagine them talking to each other and coming up with different answers, or no answer.
In August 2017, The Dreamer was performed at the Edinburgh's Fringe Festival. Finally, on the same island that gave birth to Shakespeare, Du Li Niang took to the stage. In a sense, it was a meeting. 2 old colleagues, those 2 giants of the stage, Tang Xianzu and Shakespeare, were finally getting to meet after more than 400 years. On April 23, 1616, Shakespeare passed away in Stratford-upon-Avon. Coincidentally, that day also happened to be the 52nd birthday. Back then, few people in Stratford knew about him and his achievements, so his funeral was a modest affair.
So after he's buried here for 6 years, colleagues from the Globe Theatre publish the first folio, 3 volumes containing all of Shakespeare's scripts for his plays and all of his sonnets. At the same time as the first folio is published, the memorial, the statue, little statue on the wall, is also unveiled. This is called the memorial, and Anne Hathaway and Shakespeare is still alive at this time. So the ceremony of unveiling this statue, she was here. As it was unveiled, she looked at it and she said, visually, this is my husband. So as far as we know, this memorial is an exact likeness of what William Shakespeare actually looked like.
As England rose to power and glory over the next few centuries, Shakespeare's works became globally well known as a symbol of English culture. They also became the representation of the highest achievement of human civilization.
I think now it's time for Chinese culture, and I suspect Tang and many other writers and artists will become much better known across the world, simply because there are more people looking at China, and China is looking much more out to the world. And so I think the same thing that happened to Shakespeare, where his fame rode on the back of lots and lots and lots of people sharing it, I suspect the same is going to happen with Chinese culture.
That very same year, several months after Shakespeare passed away, 66-year-old Tang Xianzu also departed this world. Like Shakespeare, his passing made little impression on the people of his hometown. However, 8 years earlier, the then Shui Chong magistrate had asked painter Shi Lu Yuan to go to Linchuan to draw a portrait of Tang Xianzu. Later, a memorial hall for Tang Xianzu was built in Suicheng in honor of Tang Xianzu's contributions to the county. That hall was called the Hall of Benevolence. Today, only a single memorial archway survives. This is a Qing Dynasty copy of Shi Lu Yuan's portrait of Tang. Calm and humble, he doesn't quite look the part of the passionate poet. Maybe that's what makes the picture so poignant. All his feeling and emotion poured into his masterpieces. There he is forever gazing back across time in contemplation of the wonderful dream that started it all.